Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a VP and Chief Privacy Officer of Public Policy at Facebook. She leads Facebook's global privacy and data policy team, where she collaborates with policymakers, regulators, advocates, academics, and other experts on issues related to privacy and data protection, ensuring Facebook's product and features reflects input from people around the world. Per to Facebook, she was a partner and co-chair of Covington and Burling's Global Data Protection Practice, where she represented technology and media companies on privacy and data security matters. Her name is Erin Egan. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Erin, you're definitely one of the most successful women in the world. I'm so thrilled to chat with you today.
Well, thank you. It's my honor to be here. Really, truly. Thank you so much.
First of all, you studied in New York, Midwest, and DC, and you've worked at law firms per to Facebook. To start the show, I'd love to learn more about what impacted you early on in your life that gets you to where you are today.
Happy to give a little bit about me. So I was born in the Midwest, actually Milwaukee, but I moved at a young age, about 6, to the Washington, D.C. area where I live right now. After my father took a job at the Department of Justice and my mother took a job at the Pentagon as a defense intelligence analyst. So I grew up with public service parents. And my mother especially was this, I think in terms of what influenced me as a young child and growing up in this area. It's amazing to actually grow up in Washington, D.C. My mother was a big proponent of equal rights for women. And I remember in the 70s, if you think about 77, 78, 79, I was like 9, 10. And there were these big marches happening for equal rights, for this equal rights amendment that was moving through. And my mom and dad, they would host people from all across the country. I think in 1978, there was like 100,000 women and men who marched on Washington. And so I just remember as a young child growing up with a house filled with activists and harmonicas and guitars and people in and out of all different types. And my mother has just been someone very influential for me, who's always pushed boundaries for women. She's almost 80 years old and she's still working at the Pentagon. She still is there. And I asked her actually, even like a month ago, I think it was, why are you still working? When do you plan to retire? And she said, I want to make it okay for older women to stay in the workforce. So she's always been someone to buck trends. And I guess I grew up with this just very strong instinct to push outside of my comfort zone, take risks, try new things, don't be afraid. Like that's how I grew up and I think shaped who I am today.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool. It sounds like you had a role model growing up, someone who is really close to you, who shows you how she thinks and behaves. And now you're pushing the boundaries yourself as well. You have a quite successful career. I assume you interact with tons of super smart people. Who do you consider as a mentor or who is on your personal board of advisors?
Yeah. And I've been fortunate throughout my career to have different people, I guess, on my board of advisors and mentors along the way, men and women. And certainly at the law firm, I was at a big law firm at the time in the 90s. It was easy to get kind of stuck in some big cases. And I started out in this, corporate law, doing things I wasn't sure about. And I just remember we would have these new matter memos come across where it'd be like, hey, do you want to try this new thing? And I just was, again, with that background of my mom, like, just try things. I would just take on new work. And I started to work in technology in the late 90s. And this intersection of consumer law and technology was super interesting to me. And I just found and I sought out people who I thought had careers that were interesting. So there were a couple of mentors that came from that period of time where that was a really pivotal point in my career. I do think like late 20s, 30s, when you're really figuring out what path am I going to go? Am I going to be, at least as a lawyer, am I going to be a corporate lawyer? Am I going to be a litigator? Am I going to do what I ended up doing, which is technology law, which at the time was developing, which meant a lot of public policy work, which means you're out there shaping the laws. And so I really just, again, stemming from that background of pushing yourself, I just pushed myself until I could find work that I felt resonated with me. And I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. And so there's some mentors that still from the law firm, a very few. Then joining Facebook almost 10 years ago, my board of directors is pretty small. I would say there's probably like 10 people total. And again, a couple from the law firm. I have one person at Facebook or two people at Facebook still who are just great mentors to me, a woman and a man. I have a couple people who have left Facebook who are outside, who still are very helpful. And it's and then I have a couple women who are just in these women's groups I'm in DC. So there's like this, it's like a diverse group. And I think this is, we often talk at Facebook about hiring people and having teams with different strengths. Mm-hmm. So I often look to hire people who are different than me, who are stronger and better than me in many areas. And so that's what I think makes a good, well-rounded team. I think the same thing for your board of advisors. It's like I have older people, younger people, men, women, different types of career paths. And my mom and dad are on that list too, because they're always still part of my life of just, they might not be the first or second, but it's like, okay, I'm thinking of this big move. And they're like, oh, just to kind of gauge what they think. So I think it's important to have a diverse board of advisors. And I think it's important to seek out mentors. I don't think and this is the same thing with your career. When I was at Covington and Burling, the law firm, I didn't let the career come to me. Again, when you start, you're put in these big groups. But you have to work harder sometimes to find what works for you, but you have to push and find it. You can't let it happen to you. You have to own it and take control of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about you have to find who you are, what you're good at, and then surround yourself with people with a more complementary skill sets. And I'm curious, you're obviously super successful. There's tons of people going to law school, top law schools, and tons of graduates. There's only one chief privacy officer at Facebook, right? So curious, we
have two of us actually. We have a product person and then we have a policy person, but it's okay. It's okay. Okay.
There's only two.
To be very clear. There's only two.
So what do you identify as your superpower? And what do you think is a skill that you or anyone need to be successful in both their career as a hands-on operational person, as well as a manager or a leader?
Yeah. And I think that the superpower, I do think that I think it's a couple things. Am I allowed to have more than one? But I do think this not being afraid thing is a real thing. And don't trust me, I get afraid, but then I often have to check myself. I'll never forget. I'll tell a quick story and then I'll go into the superpower. So when I was at Covington, and at this time I was a partner, I had 3 children, young children. So this is about 10 years ago. So they were roughly 9, 7, and 6. Mm-hmm. And I'm at Covington, and I had built this technology practice essentially by just kind of not taking no for an answer and just kind of going around to all these people who were like, what is this? And I was like, let me tell you what this is. And let me tell you why it matters. Facebook became a client of mine. So I became outside counsel to Facebook. And so I was doing a bunch of work for Facebook. And a woman, Marnie Levine, who is a good friend, reached out to me and said, hey, would you ever come into Facebook? And I was like, come into Facebook? I'm at Covington, I'm established, right? But so here I was, someone who always sort of took risks. But all of a sudden, when I was presented with a risk, I kind of was sitting back and I wasn't sure. Mm-hmm. And so then I met with Cheryl as part of sort of the interview process. And she overnighted a poster to me that I received in the mail the next day that said, what would you do if you weren't afraid? I have it framed upstairs in my office.
Wow.
What would you do if you weren't afraid? And so here I was, thinking I'm not ever afraid, but yet I was afraid and I needed someone to push me to do it. Right. So I don't want to give this impression that like, I'm just never, always going. Like at the time I had 3 young kids. I was like, I'm going to leave this established law firm to go in-house. It wasn't an obvious move. It was before Facebook was public. It was it just at the time wasn't clear that was the right path. But Cheryl really kind of snapped me out of it. What would you do if you weren't afraid? I'm like, you're right. If I wasn't afraid, I would do this. And so, so I just think having that, again, it's a superpower to just at least be willing to take risks and, look in front of you and when someone's presenting you with a risk, evaluate it, but also really think about why is it you're not going for that risk? Is it because of fear? Or is it something else? And in this case, it was fear, and that's not a good reason. But I think then the superpower, which relates to all of this too, is there's something about meeting people and really understanding your audience. And this comes to my current job. This comes to leading it. This matters when you lead a team. So my job in public policy. So I'm a trained lawyer, but my current job is not on the legal team at Facebook. I'm in the public policy group. So what does that mean? That means that I'm out there shaping the future of laws. I'm looking around corners. Where are things going? I'm having conversations. My job is to engage and talk to people and hear them and listen to them and bring back feedback to change how we do things at Facebook and shape laws. To do that, you have to meet people where they are. You have to have an understanding of what matters to someone. And this is the same thing, even when I built my practice at Covington, when everyone was like, what's this tech policy? I would show up if it's a meeting with, let's say, Hulu, or a meeting with the New York Times, or a meeting with American Express. It didn't matter. And I would say, let me tell you why this matters to you. I'm showing up to, how can I add value to you? And showing up where they are. What do they care about? What are they worried about? What are they, skeptical of? And then really trying to understand where they're coming from and then show value to them. I think that applies to public policy, that applies to leading. And I think it requires you to be a good listener and to really understand where you're meeting people. So for me, for my team, as I lead, and when I think of my direct reports, I'm always trying to understand their needs. How are they feeling? Where are they coming? It's really about understanding people and trying to give them the space to thrive while understanding what they need, what their needs are, and how I can support them.
Yeah, you have to essentially understand them to support them. You've worked at a law practice where you convinced senior partners that the privacy and data security field was worth their investment, and then building the practice into one of the best in the country. How do you sell this idea to senior partners? You've had many high-profile tech clients. Selling anything to a big tech company probably means there are many layers of people you have to sell to. How do you go about it?
Yeah. I think, again, going back to this idea of where can I add value? I think in this issue where I was at the time at the law firm, I was focused on people, like the intersection of consumer protection and technology. Every big corporation has customers or consumers. They care about their brand. They care about trust. And so you start from a place that matters to them. This gets to having a sense as to what people need or what they, of course they care about their customers. Of course they care about their brand. Of course. So then what's the issue that you're helping them solve? Well, there's an issue at the time around data and how companies were using data. And there were laws at the time. This is like the late 90s, early 2000s. Certainly in Europe, there were laws. There were things happening in California. And there were FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, was starting to investigate practices around data. And so I would really show up humbly. The number one is you show up humbly. I'm here to help, right? My motto is I'm always here to help. That's it. I'm here to help. Internal, external, I'm here to help. But let me tell you about this problem that you may not realize, or maybe you do, but here's this issue and here's how I can help. And so I do think it's when you're looking to build a practice, you have to, which was client-based, you have to really put yourself in the shoes of the client. and understand what they're thinking of, what are the tensions they're grappling with, and then find a way to help. And it's that same ethos that when I came to Facebook, I adopted. I remember one of the best pieces of advice I got when I came to the company. And again, I'm coming from a law firm, very different culture. Even though I was outside counsel to tech companies, including Facebook, including Microsoft, including others, like I mentioned, I hadn't worked inside one. It's a totally different culture. And so knowing again, the culture and the clients and meeting them where they are. And what someone gave me the advice was take heat off the engine. Take heat off the engine. So don't come in and start, you have to do all these a million things. You come in to solve problems, solve a problem someone has. And so at the time, again, even in public policy, my job is I have clients. So the business and the product teams are my clients. So the product teams, when I started 10 years ago, were grappling with various things. My job was to come in, take heat off the engine, meaning try to solve problems for them. That meant I needed to understand their needs and the tensions. So there's often tensions that they're struggling with. And how can I help? And I think that's how, whether you build a practice at law firms or whether you're looking to go in-house, it really is taking a step back, understanding the needs people have and showing up with the solution to a problem, not adding problems, adding heat to the engine.
Yeah, I totally agree. So basically you have to see where exactly is the tension and then bring the solution to the people that you're selling to. At that point, I believe data privacy was becoming a trending practice to different law firms. And when people realize that's where the business is, I bet there's a lot of competitors are coming after your clients. How do you make sure that your clients stay with it?
Well, again, I think creativity is key. And to me, it's continuing to be creative. So I'll give you an example. So when Facebook first reached out to me, what they did, it was essentially a competition to get their work. So at the time, the in-house key lawyer, deputy general counsel at the time, looked at Chambers. Chambers is a publication of the top law firms, and looked up data privacy. And there were 5 names, mine among other 5 other people at other law firms. And so this person from Facebook comes in and says, I have a hypothetical. So he gave us a hypothetical, essentially here's a problem. I'm going to give you 24 hours to solve it and come back with what you think we should do. So it's a hypothetical problem. It involved international issues. So it involved US, Europe, super interesting technology, never heard of. And how would you advise the client to deal with this? And so we had 24 hours to put it together. And I got the job. I got the gig. And basically what he told me was you had the most creative approach. And I think that's what it takes. It takes really coming in and not being so strict. The letter of the law is this, and this is this, and this is this. It's okay, here's the legal piece. Here's the communication side. Here's what I think you need to be worrying about on the marketing. It really is taking a 360-degree view of the problem and trying to come up with creative solutions. And that's something I really prided myself at a law firm I was able to do. I understood the legislation that was coming. I understood the corporate deals that were happening. I understood the litigation that could happen. I understood the communications. I understood the marketing. And then you're able to say, okay, in light of all of this, you're not just going to look at one piece, litigation. You want to look at this entire piece. So here's a way forward, taking into account all those pieces. And I think it's just constantly trying to be creative and really listen and understand their needs. I think so many outside counsel, now that I'm in-house, I see these things come in from outside counsel all the time. Hey, here's an update. Here's an update. And they're throwing the same update to everybody.
Right.
Every company is different. Every client has different needs. You have to calibrate, you have to tailor, you have to understand where they're coming from. It's a much more sophisticated. I like maybe the word sophistication is needed. It's creativity and sophistication. That's how you keep clients. Constantly understanding what they need, reading about them, understanding what the trends are, and really giving a holistic, sophisticated approach to your counseling.
I love that. I feel like you are the person who, with the big picture, right? So you know how they function in-house, and then you kind of pitch the solution that's tailored to them specifically because how well you understand them. So you have a lot of high-profile clients, for example, Microsoft, Hulu, American Express, and Facebook back in time. What's the differentiation between each company? Like when you pitch to them, how do you educate yourself on what specific things to pitch to different companies? Besides something really obvious, right? Like American Express is a credit card, and like like besides the super obvious things that we could tell.
Yeah, well, every company is on a different journey when it comes to at least the topic area where I'm an expert, which is data privacy. Mm-hmm. So before I joined the Facebook, and I was outside counsel. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly at the time I was working with Microsoft, and they had very different needs because they were a much, much more mature company that had been grappling with a variety of issues that I was pretty close to starting in the late 1990s around privacy. So they, at the time, let's say, I didn't leave. I joined Facebook in 2011. So, Microsoft in the 90s was working on privacy stuff and data stuff and figuring out. They had an FTC issue in 1999, and so early 2000s, they were doing a bunch of work. So they had different needs at the time. We were already working with them on legislation. So at the time, for example, there was legislation around spam and spyware that was moving. And it was like they cared about very specific pieces of legislation that could affect their business. Someone like Hulu at the time, they were just beginning, and they wanted to understand, a variety of issues. How should we approach marketing to consumers? How should we think about data when it comes to, a variety of issues that they were just beginning to think about. So that was a much broader representation. But in both cases, and in every case, whether it was, and again, American Express, the same thing, it was different. They're a regulated industry. They were already regulated by financial privacy laws. Because in the United States, there's financial privacy laws, there's healthcare privacy laws. We don't have a comprehensive law, but we have sort of these very industry-specific privacy laws. So you have to also know where they're coming from. Okay, well, you have an industry-specific privacy law, so you better know that law, and you better know what that means for them. And I would spend time at all the locations. So going to Microsoft and spending days with the people and listening to what their needs, and then going to Hulu and meeting with them, or going to American Express, or, it didn't matter. And then we had a bunch of newspaper clients who were coming online, like the New York Times, the Washington Post. And they were interested in I'm going online and I want to do these things. And what are cookies? And how do it was different basic stuff, right? So everybody had a different, but very important. You had to get it right. So everyone is at a different place in the journey at the time. And I think just, again, going and listening to the needs, that enables you to tailor what the advice is that's most appropriate for the client.
How do you have the big pictures mentality? You obviously know how to capture someone's attention in business and making sure you have all the top clients. I feel like most people don't even think about getting clients. They just want a promotion. They don't really understand why they're doing what they're doing. They don't think about why their function matters to the business in general. So they also won't be able to understand why they didn't get the promotion. How do you educate yourself on big picture related things? How do you have a sense of what's going on in the business?
I hope people take a step back and really understand their value and what they're offering in the system of things that are happening around them. I mean, there's so many, certainly for outside counsel, there's so many outside counsel that many of these big companies have. And you want to be someone they call for the most interesting, strategic, sensitive stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think to be that person who can answer those questions and those calls, you have to be, it takes a lot of work. You have to be the smartest person who kind of understands the issues. And in order to know the trends and where things are going, it also takes conversations externally. So what I spend most of my time doing now, and certainly what I also did a little back then, obviously now I speak to internal clients. So I have a lot of internal clients, but I spend a lot of my time external, with academics, with policy experts, with policymakers, so legislators, regulators, and listening to what's on their minds. And that's how you pick up trends. Mm-hmm. So, for example, that algorithms and the use of algorithms is on everyone's minds, and everyone's worried about that. You know that the future technologies like AR, VR, and where that's going is on everyone's minds. And these are areas that are undeveloped and undefined. We kind of have the baseline of privacy laws in Europe and around the world, Latin America, India is coming online. And obviously California has been active. You're seeing other states, Virginia passed a privacy law. We may not get federal privacy legislation comprehensive for a couple of years in the United States, but there's like privacy laws around the world. Now it's about applying those existing laws and the principles to new technologies. Mm-hmm. And the way to understand trends and where things are going is to have conversations. So if you think about, let's just take one principle that's in every single privacy law that you will read. If anyone cares to read them, they're actually quite interesting. Mm-hmm. But one of the key pieces of privacy law is consumer rights. And this is what I've been working on since I started, really interested in this area in the 1990s. And certainly before that, there have been principles. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, in 1980 put out privacy principles. So there's been like these principles that have been around. One of them, these consumer rights, is a right to know. A right to know what data is being collected about you, right? So this is something you've all seen. We've all seen privacy policies, and we all understand what those are. And that's what most laws require, a sense of you have to, as a company, tell people how you're going to, what data you collect, how you're going to use it, who you're going to share it with, what rights do people have to access it, to delete it. So there's basic principles. How do you take that and apply those? I remember we don't even have the best way to do it on mobile, right? So like even on a device like this, when it's like, even now we're scrolling through to read stuff. There's this really interesting body of work. I mean, how are we going to do it in AR, VR? How are we going to do it, when data is just being collected kind of everywhere about people and used for different purposes? So what is the right time? What's the right way? These are really interesting discussions because it's important people understand what's going on. But we also know that you have to do it in a way that works for people. That often means like in context. So is it better to give a privacy policy when I sign up for Messenger, for example? Or is it better to have some information when I sign up, some information a little bit later, some information when I use a service that might be a feature of Messenger a little bit later? These are really interesting questions that we haven't figured out because it's a lot of these privacy laws are written at a time where it's like, just give a notice of everything. And so then you have these long privacy policies. But I think applying these traditional principles to new technologies is going to be really, really interesting. And in order to be able to talk about that, you have to be having conversations. So the only way to do this and give that bigger picture and to know trends is to read and have conversations. That's for me has been, you have to have a basis of a legal practice. Like I think the fact that I was at a law firm for so long, so I understand the underpinnings of privacy law is really helpful. But then it's about, well, how are people thinking in Europe about this? How are people thinking in Latin America? How are academics thinking about it? And then what does that mean for our business?
That's so interesting. You have a lot of conversations with people in the same industry, but with different jobs to get their diverse set of opinions on things. And you mentioned that you read a lot. What do you read about? What's your information diet look like? Do you mostly focus on industry stuff, or you also pay close attention to business trends? How do you educate yourself in this matter?
Yeah, you have to understand business trends. You have to understand, because privacy is at the center of business trends. Mm-hmm. We see this when you see companies talking about privacy as a competitive differentiator. Okay, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? And then you read business press, you read policy press, conferences. I mean, Zoom conferences are actually quite good where you can just hear dialogues and have roundtable. We have a lot of roundtable discussions that I sit in sit in on, where we're just talking about trends and issues. And that includes business trends, and that includes where technology is going, and the value of technology to the world. And so, even if you think about the pandemic, one of the things that's been really interesting early on in the pandemic was a question that we often got from policymakers was, well, how can you, we really wanted to help. Mm-hmm. We wanted to help. We're a platform. How can we help maybe get good information to people? That was one way we thought we could help, right? So we built a COVID information center with accurate information about COVID and where people could go. And then we also had researchers and healthcare workers and government saying, what about data? What about location data? We would like to know if when there's a stay-at-home order, are people actually staying at home? Mm. And we took that and said, that's a really interesting question and problem. We have something at our company that's called a privacy review process. This is basically before we agree to a product launch or something like anything to do with our data use that involves something like the question I just mentioned. What kind of data would we want to share with the government? We look at it from a privacy perspective across all the dimensions of risk. Mm-hmm. And we decided early on that we're not going to share individual location information with governments, because that would not be in the individual's best interest and from a privacy perspective. However, we can still help governments by sharing aggregate de-identified data around trends. So for example, we have this work, it's called Data for Good, is a whole arm of my team. And what they do is they work with NGOs and others to share data about trends. So mobility trends. So you can imagine we had this after some big hurricanes and floods when you wanted to know where people were going so you could get relief efforts to them. So like we work with the Red Cross in some areas where it's like they wanted to know at a high level, where are people going? Okay, they're going over there. I'm going to put relief efforts over there. So we took some of that learning and we said, we can do these mobility maps that could maybe help people understand trends with COVID. Where are people going at the highest level? So maybe therefore there's more relief needed, or if we're seeing spikes in a certain area, maybe that it accounts for some movement of people. So that was a way where we could share relevant information in a privacy protective way. That's just an example of, ways in which we can partner with governments, but it's an example of, you have to, again, there's a lot of reading you have to do, a lot of conversations around needs, and then bringing that back to the team and figuring out ways we can help.
Yeah, totally. It sounds like you have to work with the policymakers since many policy was established probably a while ago. How does it evolve in general? How does tech leaders like yourself work with the policymakers?
So there's the legal regime that exists. And then on top of the legal regime, there are individual company practices. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of work building on top of what's legally required. Mm-hmm. So let's say a privacy policy is legally required. We know that that's not good enough to make sure people understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. So we ourselves, even though not required by law, we will do additional things. So for example, we launched something called a privacy checkup. Which is a way we put in front of people. We say, hi, just like you go to the healthcare, you go to your doctor to get a wellness checkup. You're going to come to our, we want to make sure that you're sharing with the audience that you want. We want to make sure you're using apps that you want to be connected to you. We want to make sure that you understand what's going on. So we built something called a privacy checkup, which is we didn't have to do that, but we did that because we wanted to make sure people understood as best as we could how their data can be managed. So in terms of changing things, another area where we receive feedback all the time from policymakers, from privacy experts around other areas, and then we'll change them, even though the law may not require it. So for example, we receive feedback from privacy experts, policymakers about managing old posts and photos and other content in bulk. So we created a control where you could archive content you didn't want people to see on Facebook, but you might want to keep for yourself. We also built this manage activity area And we added a deletion control that you can move old posts in bulk to trash. And then after 30 days, that trash will be deleted. So we are constantly building on top of the legal regime based on feedback from regulators, policymakers, privacy experts. So we don't stop at what's legally required. We build on top of it.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned that you guys did some innovations after getting feedbacks. How do you work with the technology team? Do you communicate your idea on what to build and then they build it? Or do you have to collaborate with a lot of different teams and having conversations with many internal stakeholders?
So as I mentioned, I'm fortunate to have a partner, a chief privacy officer of product. Mm-hmm. So a fellow by the name of Michelle Proddy. He leads a product and engineering team. Mm-hmm. And so the product team, and I sit on the public policy team, and then we have a legal team. Mm-hmm. It's sort of these three legs of the stool. Mm-hmm. The lawyers, the policy, we're the ones who look at like the future and the trends and what should you do. The lawyers say, what can we do? And then the product people, they have a lot of views and they're the ones who also implement and say whether it's possible, right, to do these things and the timeline. And so we work in partnership, the three teams. And so as the privacy review piece sits at the center, and that's operated by Michelle's team. So what the job of Michelle's team is to understand the products and the business tools that are coming online in the future, and then to bring those to this group of policy, legal, product. And we also have some other folks in there, security, marketing, and to have a conversation about risks. And so, and the product leaders of the company. So Michelle interfaces with the product vertical leaders. So that would be people from Facebook Blue or Instagram or WhatsApp or Oculus. And so they all make sure that their products come to this privacy review and they join that conversation. So if it's a new product in Oculus, the Oculus people will join the conversation and we'll have a conversation. But it's a very structured situation where we know what's coming and we have a conversation about it. And that's the way. And then our job on public policy is we have these conversations early enough that in most cases with things that are interesting and novel and sophisticated, we then go out and we get feedback. So the job of my team is to say, let me go talk to, if I don't, if I or my team doesn't, it's an interesting thorny issue, like how should we provide a notice in a virtual reality headset? Should it be this way, this way? We might go talk to some experts. So we have people we talk to, and remember, we're a global company. So I have a team in Asia Pacific and Latin America. We have folks in India and in Europe who help us. And we brief these teams on what's coming. And then we get feedback from them on what do we think are going to be, what's the best way to offer this notice in light of your culture and the background, in your area, what's going on over there. So, and then we come back and bring that back to the product team. So it's this circle of, we understand what's going on. We go out, we get feedback, we bring that feedback back, and we work to shape products and services together with the product team and the lawyers and others. So it's a very iterative, very collaborative process. It's by no means us just saying, you must do this. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation. If we do it this way, the screen is only this big. We're only going to be able to fit this much. So if there's only 5 words you can have, what 5 words would you have? And we're like, well, I think it should be these 5 words, but I'm going to go talk to this expert and see if, she thinks it should be these 5 words or maybe a different 5 words. I mean, some of this stuff is hard. It's really hard. You want to make sure you're conveying interesting information to people at the right time so that they understand what's going on. I mean, our collective job of policy, legal, product, and everybody at the company is we don't want to surprise people. We want people to feel good about their experiences on Facebook. So we do a lot of surveys also of people. Like, I don't know if you've ever been on Facebook and you've ever gotten a survey of after you've used a feature, we get feedback. So if we launch a new feature, like this bulk deletion feature, and someone uses it, we might say, was that easy for you to use? Did you like the way that was presented? Did you understand this about it? And then we'll get feedback. And that's another piece of data that we use to make decisions about how to change things. So we're a very iterative, constantly improving company. So we never sort of sit still with the law passing and then do the minimum of what the law requires. We do a lot of work with feedback, and it's just a lot of conversations internally and externally. That's what my team does. Wow. We have conversation.
Yeah, totally. That's so cool. At the beginning, you were at a law firm, then you transformed into the in-house policy team. There are listeners who are founders. In terms of selling a product or service to a big company, how does it normally work? Do they have to know someone from the top, or should they start with a certain relevant department or start from the MA team? How should the conversation of a potential collaboration starts, and how is a decision going to be made?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I don't think there's one central funnel. I think that it often starts because someone knows someone. And that's often the right way to start. If you know someone at the company and you have a really good idea, and then typically the people internally, they know that Michelle's chief privacy officer product, they know that I do the public policy stuff. But most of if it's a new product feature or tool that can help on the product side with data, that typically Michelle's team would take a look at that. And they've looked at those kinds of things before. And certainly when things come to me, I'll forward it over to Michelle, and he might have an engineer on his team take a look and see if it's something interesting that we could incorporate. I mean, we have obviously top engineers, the top security professionals, people, just incredible professionals doing this work. But we always love to hear from others who might have good ideas about how we can do things better. And that's certainly the case on, public policy side, but also on the product side. So I always encourage folks, if you have contacts, reach out there. But if it is something around data use, privacy, I think just knowing that we have this centralized team at the company that focuses on the tooling and the software and the infrastructure for data. That's this team. That's the product privacy team. They exist. And so even just saying to whomever your contact is, hey, this might be of interest to the privacy product team, maybe you could forward it over to them. That seems like a reasonable place to start.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned about all these different teams. I'm sure there were tons of collaborations and managements in your job. What's your day-to-day like as a VP and Chief Privacy Officer of Public Policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think because there's three main components to my job. Product advice, based on my policy experience. There's then policy development. So that's also like, what should the law look like? What should the future look like around algorithms? So there's a lot of just policy development work. This isn't about privacy policies. This is much more public policy development. What should the future legal structure be? So I think I spend most of my days with a little product, a little policy, public policy development, and then engagement. The third piece, there's always, whether I'm talking to someone in Europe or around the world, it's this engagement piece. It's either listening to someone, having a conversation with someone, explaining something. So my typical day usually involves those pieces, some product pieces, some public policy, legislative pieces, and then some engagement piece. And that for me is a typical day. I mean, for example, like right now around my world, and I won't get too deep on it, but there's a huge issue around data flows. So one of this, in Europe from Europe to the United States and from Europe to other countries around the world, just as background for 1 minute, there's this privacy law in Europe. You might have heard of it. It's called GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And it says that data about EU persons, data subjects, that information cannot be transferred outside of Europe unless the receiving country has an adequate level of data protection. And so we certainly, as the United States, believe that we have a variety of privacy laws that provide an adequate level of data protection, but the Europeans don't agree. So the Europeans and the US government a few years ago came up with an agreement that was called the Privacy Shield, so the data could transfer between the two countries. It's really important that the data from Europeans, it's all about trading. If data from Europeans can't flow to the United States, this is like think of all the transactions, shopping. It's not a Facebook issue. This is an issue for all of industry. So this was something that the US government prioritized. It was something that the European Commission on behalf of all the EU countries prioritized. But that privacy shield was struck down last summer. Mm-hmm. And now they're renegotiating a new deal. And it's a really important moment to be renegotiating. President Biden is visiting Brussels in mid-June to talk about trading and the importance of the two economic powerhouses working together. And data flows is a huge piece of it. So right now, in terms of my day-to-day, I'm spending a lot of time having conversations with people across industries, across government, across academia, in Europe, in the United States, about how can we help the US government and the European Commission reach this agreement? What is it that needs to change about the US regime to help the Europeans feel okay coming to an agreement with the United States around data flows? Because it's such an important part of our, economy and the economic interests of both sides. So I probably am spending 50% of my time right now on that. But then in any given day, I'll also do a little bit of product and I'll also do something else. But that just gives you a taste of the kinds of things I work on.
Wow, I'm so glad you're taking the time doing the show. I feel like you're doing so many important things and your life is like a movie. Facebook has so many lines of products. If half of your time is communicating internally, how do you split your time to work on each product? Do you prioritizing the time for the core product, or do every product gets the same amount of attention? How do you set KPIs for yourself, and how do you evaluate your work?
Yeah, we work really closely with product leaders, and we have a very good understanding of their product roadmap and their strategies. Mm-hmm. And that's across all of our products. And so our job and our goal collectively, certainly as the public policy team, but even with communications and legal and the other teams I mentioned, is to create the space for our products and our services to thrive, right? We want to serve people. People are at the center of everything we do. So we want to make sure that our products and services serve people and that they thrive. And so a lot of what my team's job is, I think it depends on it depends on the product, but across all of them, I guess I would say, is our metric is, are we helping the product team strategize appropriately and land products in market in a way that people understand, policymakers understand, the press understand. So that's on us. If people aren't understanding how something works, well, we got to do better. If policymakers are confused about how advertising works on our service, well, we got to do better. So, our work is never done. And it's often, it can be difficult sometimes with the politics, because sometimes people aren't, listening, or not. They don't want to listen. They just want to sort of say it's a problem. Most people, though, care and want to listen. Most people really want to understand and want to listen, and aren't going to just bash Facebook because we're the most recent punching bag in the press or something. But most policymakers, from where I sit, and most of the academics and experts we deal with, they're very curious about understanding how things work. So our job is, our KPI, our goals is to make sure that when products get launched, that policymakers understand what's going on. They feel good about the launch. They get what the product's doing. And that is across all the products and business services that we offer.
Wow, that's a great KPI, and your job's definitely super important. As someone who has a great career, what is one piece of career advice you would give to your own children?
I certainly, my children now are 19, 17, and 15. So they are able to hear my career advice, and I often give it. I don't hold back. I really want them to have that same grounding that I had as a child. Obviously different time in the 70s and 80s versus now, but to me, it's about taking risks and not being afraid. To me, it's not giving up just because you fail. I remember this when I was young, my mother really wanted me to water ski. Like, she was a big water skier, and I was scared to death of water skiing, and she would not let me leave the lake. Just no matter how many times I fell, until I got up. Like, I wanted to give up. I wanted to stop. And she was like, nope, you can do this. You can do this. And I did it, but it took like 10 times, and I easily could have given up. I easily could have just said, no way, and thrown in the towel. And I didn't. And I just want my children to never give up and keep trying. Right. I mean, obviously we all have different strengths. So I'm not going to be the best, water skier. And I never became this, barefoot water skier like my mom, who could do tricks and all sorts of stuff. But I felt like I could do it. And I just think that knowing that if you want to do something, take risks and keep pushing, because you can do it. It sounds cliche, but it's that like, don't let fear stop you. What would you do if you weren't afraid? I have that poster upstairs in a way that my kids can all see it and they know it. And it's something that I really try to have them take risks, go for it, live on the edge, push out of your comfort zone. And the other thing my mom did, and my dad, is like, no expectations. Like, you don't have to be X, you don't have to be Y. I'm not going to like put that on you. I'm not going to make, but you have to try. I'm not going to say you have to be the best water skier. I'm not saying you're going to, go barefoot water skiing, but you got to try, because you can't be afraid to try things. So I think it's that kind of messages together that I try to give to my children, or I give it to my children, I think they accept it. My daughter, she's a freshman in college, and I think she is someone who is, she pushes outside of her comfort zone, and she'll recognize when she's holding back herself. She'll be like, you know what? I know I'm not doing this. I'm not going to this party because I'm afraid of, whatever. And I'm just going to go. And it's like, and she'll go and she'll have fun. I mean, it's like on minor pieces, but I think the principle applies regardless of the issue. It's like, push yourself a little bit. Don't be afraid.
Yeah. You mentioned you were a little bit scared because you had 3 small children when they were younger, right? And then you have to feed the family, and then you were a little bit afraid at that point.
Yeah.
So besides Cheryl sent you the poster, and then today you're obviously super successful. That was an amazing decision. If the things turn out the other way, like for example, if things didn't work out, like how would you cheer yourself up to keep going?
Yeah. And I think things don't always work out. Right. I mean, things like if I had come here, if it had been too much work, the kids, it was like too hard. I think then you pivot and you move. And I do think that careers, they can be a jungle gym. It's not necessarily linear. There might be times in your career where you have to kind of go down a couple spaces or, down to the lower level. And that's okay. There was a woman when I was at Covington who, when I was a young mother, and she at the time had older children, she said, just keep your pinky in. Just don't take your whole hand out, like just keep part of it in, and so that stuck with me. It's like, you don't necessarily, if I came to Facebook and job was too much travel, too much, then you know what, I would have gone down a couple notches. Maybe I would have gone back to the law firm. Maybe I would have, but at the time I made the decision, the reason I was holding back was a fear decision, and it wasn't based on facts. So I didn't have the facts to know it was too hard. I didn't have and it turned out that I could manage it. But I think if the facts then presented themselves, it was too much work, too hard on the kids, too hard on the family. Well, then you pivot and you change. I think you can't assume things are going to be bad and therefore not take risks. Mm-hmm. I remember as a partner at Covington, there were women coming up who would say to me at their like 6th or 7th year, I think I'm just going to be of counsel. I don't think I'm going to go for partnership. And I'd say, why? Oh, well, because I think it's going to be too hard. I think it's going to be too much. No. Don't take yourself out of the game before it even starts. You have no idea if it's going to be hard, right? I mean, it's like, so you can't assume it's going to be bad or assume it's going to be hard. You got to go for it. And then if it is, you pivot. But know that you can always pivot. That's okay. You can pivot. It's career is a jungle gym. You can go down, you can go back up. I mean, my mom's 80 years old. She's still working. And she's still crushing it. Okay. We have a long career. Take your time if you want to when the kids are young. Try to keep that pinky in and don't give up before the game starts.
This is so inspirational. When you mentioned about your mom who was in the 80s, she's like 80 years old.
She's 80. Yeah.
Yeah. So this reminds me of this week I chat with CEO of Republic. He worked with the founder of Sky Vodka. The founder of Sky Vodka started the company when he was in his 70s, started Sky Vodka. And then Sky Vodka was sold for like 600 million. So it's, yeah, anyway. So
that's it. I mean, come on. So like careers are long. If you need to take a step back, but just try not to step out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly what you said. So we're at the last part of the interview. I have a 1-minute fire round for you. So first question, what's your favorite book?
Oh my gosh. I just finished Clara and the Sun, and I loved it. I don't know if it's my favorite book of all time, but I just finished it, and it's a great read. If you haven't read Clara and the Sun, read it.
I'll read it. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I mean, how many times have I mentioned my mother?
Your mom.
I'd have to say my mom. I mean, it's like, I don't even realize it until I've said it like 50 times. So it has to be like my mom.
Yeah. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would, I mean, like a long list, like the Kamala Harris's, and I'd invite I'd invite some amazing women. I'd have a female only kick-ass party with like a bunch of different diverse women who are rock stars. Yeah. And Kamala be top of the list.
Awesome. Where can we find you outside of work?
I love outdoor hiking outside of work. There's a mountain called Old Rag, which is in the Shenandoah Valley. It's like an hour and a half from here. And I like crush it to the top. So you'd find me like on a mountaintop somewhere screaming and being like, yes.
Oh my God. That's awesome. I love that. I love hiking or camping or anything.
Yeah. It just brings you back to the center, and it's so meditative.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, Erin, for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Besides LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button.